and an inmate tells me that he asks Cecilia for a cigarette. Cecilia goes out to a pavilion, and a guy comes out from behind the plant and wraps her with a blanket. Hello everyone, how are you? Apologies for my long absence, I've been occupied. I see you're now hosting a show called The Dark Zone on PIC. It airs on Twitch every Tuesday at 10 p.m. I've been uploading the shows to the channel. If you didn't see it, I'm going to leave the playlist here below so you can watch it. It's intriguing to learn about paranormal cases involving exorcists and aliens. Today we will discuss a case that personally interested me a lot. Many have requested Argentine cases from me. We have already covered the case of Petiso Orejudo on this channel. We have covered the case of the Satanic Sisters of Saavedra. We have covered the case of Barreda, the dentist, and I think it's time to cover a disappearance case. Something that happened in the 80s, and that has to do with a psychiatrist who worked in a very suspicious place that is still open today. I wanted to explore this place a few times, but realized it was extremely risky to enter. You'll find out why. The place itself is called Open Door. It's a colony where a lot of people with mental problems are interned, people who many were abandoned there by their family, others who are visited, but it's a place that is remote, away from the city and everything, almost in a very rural area, and it's a place that has a lot of rumors behind it, rumors that there is organ trafficking there, that experiments are conducted on the people who are interned there. The backstory is extremely murky, and it seems that there is a Dr. Cecilia Enriqueta Giubileo, who was investigating all of this, who was about to bring to light everything that was happening there because she was working there, and unfortunately she couldn't do it. Today I'm going to tell you her story. Dr. Cecilia Enriqueta Giubileo was 39 years old and worked at the Open Door Mental Health Colony. This is located in Torres, near Luján, situated within the province of Buenos Aires in Argentina, as I already told you, in a rural area, in a forest area, away from the town, a difficult place to access if you don't have your own transportation. She was last seen on the night of June 16th, 1985, when a nurse and one of her patients exchanged a few words with her after seeing her in a hallway. After that, the last person to see her was her murderer. The disappearance of Dr. Giubileo, beyond speculations and hypotheses, harvested a thick and impenetrable mystery. But to delve into this mystery, I have to tell you what Open Door is, how this place was founded, and how it evolved from the main idea to what it is today. At the beginning of the 20th century, Dr. Domingo Cabret had a dream that had a lot to do with Argentina of those years. A time when people dreamed of huge buildings rising in a city that was growing rapidly, a very good economic situation of the country that accompanied this development. New institutions, companies, factories that were opening day by day. People were prosperous, and in the midst of that prosperity, this doctor dreamed of creating a place where mental patients would be cared for and cured, because until that moment all people with psychiatric disorders were admitted to ordinary public hospitals and did not receive adequate care. The doctors had not had the necessary education. They did not have the knowledge to treat these people and to cure their ills. So Domingo Cabret decided to open a hospital that specialized in these problems, and there to be able to accommodate all these people who did not have money to pay for treatment, but nevertheless deserved to have good treatment from the doctors and be cured of their ills. Dr. Cabret's project got underway in the year 1906, and it was realized in the year 1915 when these events occurred. The place officially named Dr. Domingo Cabret, but known as Colonias Montes de Oca or Colonia Open Door, occupied 600 hectares in the town called Torres near Luján, 60 kilometers from Buenos Aires in the year 1985. Which is when this happens, the town had 1,500 inhabitants, and hundreds of these inhabitants worked within the Open Door colony, performing multiple services from nursing services to kitchen cleaning, maintenance, and more. Many had received the position from their parents. It was something that was inherited from father to son, or if not by recommendation. But a large part of the town's inhabitants worked in this place. Open Door was a place, a self-sufficient colony. They practically didn't need to go shopping elsewhere because they had their own animals, their own crops. It was a place where everything could be concentrated and create a closed colony without the need to socialize or without the need to leave the place to get provisions. The Open Door colony, which as you know means open doors, that was the treatment received by the people who were interned there, housed approximately 1,200 mentally ill people, people with psychological problems, psychiatric problems, who received treatment there. These people were distributed in 12 pavilions that were erected over a central building that had a construction similar to a Norman castle. In addition to this, the place had a very long road to travel, it had a forest around it, and even had its own lagoon. Open Door was conceived as an open asylum in which the surrounding peace would alleviate the pain of the people interned there, but that was not what was happening. Open Door was a branch of hell. Dr. Cecilia Giubileo was born in the year 1946. She had studied medicine at the University of Cordoba, and in the 60s she had participated in multiple marches because she was a supporter of the left. So she participated in strikes and protests, and others. Even in the year 1969, she had participated in the famous Cordobazo, in the student protests that had filled the streets of the universities of Cordoba. It was among all this movement that Cecilia met a man named Pablo Chabrol. She fell in love with this man, they got married and went to live in Gijon, Spain. There, Cecilia tried to validate her degree, but the attempts lasted very little, as did the marriage. They were only married for a year and she returned to Argentina. Now separated and with no ideas of forming a new couple, the doctor focused on her studies. And so in 1973 she received her diploma. She finally graduated as a doctor. She studied at the University of Cordoba and lived for a time in Campana, working in a metallurgical clinic. But in the year 1974, she received a position at this asylum called Open Door, and she stayed to live in the small town of Luján, which was relatively close to this madhouse. She rented a house on Humberto Primo Street and also a clinic in the town of Torres. Here, a metal plaque placed on the front of this clinic read, Dr. Cecilia Giubileo, Clinical Physician. She lived alone, and in a very short time she became very beloved by the people of the town who came to her for their consultations, and they didn't always have money to pay her, but nevertheless she attended to them anyway. In addition to that, she worked at Open Door, where she constantly dealt with the pain of the people interned there. And in her free time, she dedicated herself to the study of Chagas disease. Perhaps she was preparing for some doctorate, some special research on her part. When she disappeared, investigators and the press started investigating her private life. They wanted to know if she had a partner, if she lived alone all the time, what kind of sexual orientation she had, and they began to find out that she had dated a doctor from Campana with an accountant from Capital Federal who had bought some hectares even in Tigre, that she had taken out a fixed term with her colleague from Campana, and it was even rumored that she had had certain affairs with some nurse colleagues. The people of the town, in such a small town, talked and began to invent stories, but there was nothing concrete for sure. Even one of her nurse colleagues got very angry about the level of questions that the journalists asked, the indiscreet questions, because they said that after all. What did it have to do with what they were asking about the doctor's disappearance or her professional work? In the end, they found that the only person who knew all of Cecilia Giubileo's secrets was her 60-year-old mother, Maria Lancetti. At the time of these events, she lived in Cordoba, and the doctor wrote her many letters all the time. She constantly sent correspondence to her mother, telling her about her life, her experiences, her work, and so on. A weekly newspaper, when all this happened, published some of these letters. It got hold of this correspondence, and in it you could read phrases like, "I want to have a child, start a home, wait for my husband when he comes home from work. I want to, and I can't, I don't know what's happening to me, I can't stand it, I feel like I'm falling apart." These issues raise many questions about the doctor's private life. But as I already told you, none of this could be seen concretely. Nothing could be proven. There was no concrete evidence of anything, whether she had any kind of stable partner or what had happened with the different relationships she had established during her stay in this little town of Lujan and her work in the town of Torres at Open Door. The fact is that Dr. Cecilia Giubileo was on duty the night of June 16, 1985, along with 2 colleagues. She had arrived at the Torres colony driving her white Renault 6. She had signed her entry card at 21:36. The weather was horrible, it was cold and damp. And at night a thick fog had descended that covered everything. Usually the on-call doctors stayed in a small shack they had built next to this huge building. From this huge site, almost a castle as I told you, and they were usually there doing desk work, writing some reports, filling out forms and so on until one of the patients required their presence. That night the doctor had treated a patient who had bronchitis and a high fever, and then she had filled out the paperwork for a family who had come to collect the body of a person, a female relative who had died at the Open Door. At 12:15 a.m. on Monday the 17th, a nurse encountered Dr. Giubileo. He inquired about any updates, and she replied that everything was under control, having just treated a case of urticaria in Ward 7. That night, the doctor was wearing a blue jogging suit with white stripes on the sides, a light blue jacket, and also had white sneakers. The Ward 7 that she had mentioned was 500 meters from the medical house where she had resided until that moment, and she had made all that itinerary on foot, but she never went and came back alone. There was a patient named Miguel Cano who had gone to fetch her at the medical house and had taken her to the place where they needed her, and then he had accompanied her back. Why had this patient gone to fetch the doctor? Well, because mysteriously that night the telephone switch at Open Door was not working, so when any patient needed the help of the professional, they had to go fetch her at the medical house. Picture this night. It was extremely dark with a thick fog covering everything. The only light came from the mercury lights arranged along the way. Length of the corridor that connected the medical house with the main entrance of the Open Door. On the sides, both to the left and to the right, a deep and thick darkness reigned. That's how he spent the whole night. Dawn broke. It was the morning of the 17th. The whole colony woke up to the still thick light of that Monday. Why? Because the bad weather still continued. It was still cloudy, so the few rays of light that passed through did not give a complete light. The sun was just rising when the doctors who came in for the morning shift noticed that Dr. Giubileo's Renault was still parked next to the medical house. So they said, how strange it's still there. They went to see her, and when they opened the door of this house, they found that the bed was unmade. The folders in which she had been working were open on the desk. There were some brown shoes arranged there next to the bed, but they found no trace of Dr. Cecilia Giubileo. In addition to that, her briefcase had disappeared, the medical briefcase with all her tools that she used to perform her work. What had happened? Had she been called urgently? Someone in the town? Couldn't she have left a note saying she had to leave urgently? How strange. Had someone come to visit her? Had someone required her presence? Something extremely odd was occurring. That day passed, then the next, and the subsequent ones. And there were no clues about Dr. Cecilia Giubileo. Both her colleagues and acquaintances, her relatives, began to worry. The investigation began to find out her whereabouts. They began to look for clues, traces, to talk to witnesses. The last person who had spoken to her had been this patient, this man who had gone to look for her at the medical house. The last known sentence of Dr. Giubileo had been, "Go easy, I'm going to rest for a while." Then she was not seen anymore. No strange movement, no person who was not from the place had appeared in the open door colony that Sunday night, nor during the course of Monday. However, Dr. Cecilia Giubileo had disappeared without a trace. Thus began the painful and slow investigation into the doctor's disappearance, carried out by the federal judge Dr. Hector Heredia. Suddenly, the quiet colony was invaded by a bunch of strangers who carried out the investigation. There were police with packs of dogs trained to sniff out corpses, traces of people going through every hallway of the place. There was a helicopter tracking with its spotlight, every path of the forest that surrounded the open door. The police began to investigate, began to look at the lofts that were closed, the basements. They even had 2 pavilions open that had been closed down. They checked every inch of the open door colony. However, Dr. Cecilia Giubileo was nowhere to be found. Cecilia's family, distressed by the whole situation, decided to hire a lawyer who started his own investigation, Dr. Marcello Parelli. I found disturbing information. Cecilia had filled up her car's tank, she had gone to a gas station, had asked them to fill it up, and had a full tank of gas by Sunday afternoon. However, when they went to investigate the car, when they started looking for clues, there wasn't a drop of fuel in the Renault's tank. Another striking fact, the patient who had gone to pick up the doctor to the medical house had at one point seen a funeral stretcher coming out. Of course, he thought it was this family that had passed, who had gone to pick up the woman who had recently passed away, and they were transporting her body to bury her. However, he also saw a strange car with tinted windows circling around open door. The funeral home said that car wasn't theirs. No one knew where it had come from. All the staff from the Monte de Oca colony were thoroughly questioned. It seemed that no one knew anything. However, there were other witnesses, silent witnesses. I'm talking about these 1,200 psychiatric patients who were hospitalized in the place. Could these people be questioned? Could the testimony of people who had been hospitalized for delusions, for psychological problems, for hallucinations be trusted? The police found themselves in a complicated situation. The people who could give a testimony that was trustworthy, apparently, were either lying or genuinely knew nothing. And the potential witnesses to the events, those who might have heard something, those who might have seen something, were not in a position to give a coherent statement that could be taken seriously by a jury. It was then when the investigators and the police began to investigate, as I already told you, the private life of the doctor, who, as it is known, had had several lovers, was a young person, was a beautiful person, good looking, which is why she had had a lot of lovers and people with whom she had related. All the people who were questioned, both men and women, had come out free from this interrogation. None seemed to be a suspect. Dr. Cecilia Giubileo worked, studied taekwondo, studied singing, and was also part of a choir in the city of Lujan. She had a lot of friends in Torres and even established a very close relationship with a woman named Grandma Belido, an elderly woman, a very beloved elderly woman in the town, a poor lady who had no family and whom the doctor had taken as a second mother. Sometimes Dr. Cecilia visited an 8-year-old girl who was her goddaughter. Many times this girl also stayed overnight at her house. Even that Sunday night she was supposed to stay overnight at her godmother's house, but Cecilia told her not to come. Was this perhaps a clue? Did she know what was about to happen? That's when a lot of hypotheses started to be considered. One of them suggested that the country's tumultuous past had directly affected Cecilia's life. As I already told you, she had participated in certain left-wing parties. In her youth, she had been active in these political parties. She had been part of protests, of marches against the government. And even though her ex-husband Pablo Chabrol had no criminal record, his 2 brothers had been militants of the enterprise resource planning, and even appeared on the list of missing persons of the National Commission on the Disappearance of Persons. In addition to that, the father of these two young men, that is Cecilia's former father-in-law, had been arrested for investigating on his own about the disappearance of his sons. But the supposed political connection failed to progress, because no influential or important point was found that linked all these movements with Cecilia's disappearance. Other hypotheses were discussed. It was also said that she had been kidnapped for ransom, but however, her house on Humberto Primo Street was searched and her savings were found hidden inside a can. There were $3,000? No one had touched that money, no one had asked for a ransom for her. One possibility considered was that a patient attacked her. But it was very strange that a patient with psychiatric problems would have planned a crime with such precision, something so clean, that it didn't leave even a minimal trace. How a person with mental problems had this ability to hide a murder like that. So that was another hypothesis that was discarded, and their people started talking about rumors. It was said that she had been seen entering a castle in the town of Wolves. It was said that she had been seen walking on a street in a nearby town. People started to hallucinate that they saw her everywhere, but little by little the truth began to emerge. This investigation brought to light a lot of things that at first glance no one had noticed. Apparently this open-door hospital, maybe because of the place where it was located, maybe because it was away from everything. It had been chosen as a place where organ trafficking was carried out. Many of the inmates, as I already told you, were poor people. People who had no home, people who had no family, and it seems that they were taken as guinea pigs. Apparently, strange experiments were carried out with these people. New drugs that were being researched in this place were experimented on them. And when these people who had no relatives died, an autopsy was performed on them. Their healthy organs were extracted, and these organs were sold on the black market. Corruption reigned completely in a place where 85% of the inmates, who remember were 1,200, 200, had not been visited by their relatives in the last year. This fact was revealed by a study conducted by Dr. Silvia Balsano from National Scientific and Technical Research Council several years later. The disorganization, the neglect, the lack of control made Open Door a guinea pig depot. The evidence began to come to light. There were overprices of everything. There were poorly made invoices. There was money laundering in this place. For example, they discovered that the previous year they had made a request to the state for a sum of money intended to buy 25,000 sheets. However, only about 100 entered the property. What had happened to the rest of the money? Where had it been used? Who had kept the fruit of this overbilling? The judicial survey, but more than anything, the investigations of the news, of the journalists, began to pierce these official complicities that were happening in this place, and public opinion did all the rest. Thousands of patients had passed through the place without their date of admission, their data, nothing being recorded. Absolutely nothing about their admission or their discharge. When they passed away, the date of their death was also not recorded. In the internal summary, the director of the colony excused himself by saying that many of the patients used to escape, and that's why they couldn't be updating every day who was there and who wasn't, nor taking lists because there were so many and it was beyond their capabilities to carry out a daily count of the inmates. Inmates, however, as they delved deeper into this investigation, they discovered that one of the people who had been admitted to the place, but there was never any record of their departure, their discharge, and had been pointed out as one of the inmates who had fled, escaping through the forest, was a paraplegic person. How is a paraplegic going to get up from their stretcher and cross the main door of a psychiatric hospital and escape through the forest to start a new life? A person who cannot move on their own, how is that going to happen? And just like this person, they started to find a lot of names and irregularities. Many questions began to float because the mortality rate was so high in this hospital. Were corneas being extracted at Open Door? Was plasma being trafficked, which at that time was sold for $60? Were the 1,200 inmates of Open Door involuntary donors? Were kidneys, livers, corneas from patients who were still alive being sold, but no one claimed them? The press began to point out a strange parallelism of this place with another hospital where these kinds of trafficking issues, these kinds of experiments were being conducted. They compared the experiments at Open Door with the experiments conducted at Ashwood by Dr. Mengele during the Nazi regime in World War II. All these data began to make a strange connection with the disappearance of Dr. Giubileo. They had dug as much as they could into her private life and found absolutely nothing. That's when they began to deduce that what might have happened to Cecilia was that she had poked her nose where it didn't belong, had discovered something very murky in this place, and maybe she was about to bring it to light. Maybe she was about to report it and someone wanted to silence her. A summary was opened against all these irregularities that were happening in the Open Door. Even in this summary, it was mentioned that many of these nurses, the women who maybe were just beginning to take their first steps in the world of medicine, were sexually harassed in this place. And some of them might even have been forced into prostitution. It was discovered that patients, women from Open Door, had become pregnant and nothing was known about the whereabouts of their children. Some journalists who were investigating this case, such as Enrique Streck, were threatened with death. A documentary about organ trafficking worldwide was launched on the British Broadcasting Corporation in London, and more than half an hour of this documentary was focused on what was happening in the Open Door colony. This investigation was carried out by Bruce Harris, who found a lot of things that both Argentine investigators and the Argentine press had overlooked. This documentary and TV program had a massive impact. Dr. Eliseo Sanchez, who was the director of Open Door, was tried, found guilty, and detained for these irregularities. For all these events that had been found in this psychiatric hospital, he died in jail without providing any data that would clarify the mystery. The press continued talking for many years, and even a lot of strange events began to happen. You could say sensationalist. There were mentalists who came forward with television programs and said that the doctor's body was in a well, in a cistern that was in this place. Others said it was buried somewhere else in the field. Everything began to get distorted until little by little the waters calmed down. One of the doubts that remained was if they carried out such a large investigation, a raid, why did no one drain the waters of the lagoon that was part of the Open Door Hospital? Why did no one conduct a search in the depths of this lake? Could it be that the doctor's body was there? To this day, it remains a mystery. Over all these years, thousands of news stories have continued to appear about organ trafficking, about places where inmates are mistreated. This place is still open. Nowadays, it's very difficult to access Open Door. They ask for a lot of identification, there's security everywhere, and even your life is at risk if you conduct a private investigation about this place. Dr. Cecilia Giubileo is still missing. Her mystery still hangs in the air. No one was implicated in her presumed death. And that's it for today's investigation. I hope you liked the case of Dr. Cecilia Giubileo, the organ trafficking that took place here at the Open Door Hospital, which, as I tell you, is still open and can even be visited in the forums where I was researching urban explorations, where I was getting places to investigate. Several people had managed to get in, but they had reported that security people had appeared, they had confronted them, they had threatened them with weapons, and they had been thrown out of this place in bad ways. We planned to go several times, but it really got complicated because the Open Door Hospital is very difficult to access. Maybe one day we can carry out this investigation. Now I want you to leave below what you think about this case. If you enjoyed this, please like the video and subscribe if you haven't already. When we get to more than 10,000 likes, I will release a new investigation case of mysteries, disappearances, or crimes. My name is Magnus Mephisto. I hope you liked today's video. You can contact me on my Instagram that appears below. In the description, we will surely see each other in the next video.